Now you're welcome along to the Sunday Paper Review. Joe Malloy with you this afternoon. I'll start by running through the back pages across the papers. So good news for Christian Eriksen, according to the Mirror here. Eriksen's the bee's knees, so it seems Christian Eriksen is set to sign for Brentford within the next 72 hours. So back in Premier League football, Christian Eriksen, which is great news for him. Wish him well with it. The Star then, they go with the events yesterday where Aston Villa were hit by missiles. The Everton crowd throwing coins and bottles, and a baguette even as well seemed to land on the pitch. So that's made the back pages in quite a few places. Everton 0, Aston Villa 1. Bottle job is the headline, as you might expect. Manchester United make the back pages across the board as well. Picture of Marcus Rashford, rash and grab. Marcus Steele's win with late hammer blow. Manchester United beating West Ham by 1-0 yesterday, very late on. Mail on Sunday, similar theme. Rashford seals it in Fergie time. Manchester United 1, West Ham 0. Beneath that, you won't be shocked to see Ranieri out. Watford, as is their way, poised to sack boss after woeful defeat to their relegation rivals. And then a couple of papers have the GAA story on their back page. The GAA Central Council gives green light to proposal. So it does seem that come 2023, there is now an excellent chance we'll have a new format to the Gaelic football year. The Green proposal, just to remind you, leaves the basic structure of the GAA calendar unchanged, writes Alan Morrissey here in the Mail on Sunday. So it has an All-Ireland round-robin system. Basically, we'll have 8 provincial finalists and the top 8 Alliance League teams into 16, 4 groups, round-robin. In a sense, the shape of the season will be a league, then a provincial championship played across 5 weeks, its own competition in a sense. But as you see, there is a benefit to getting to a provincial final. And then we're into a round-robin All-Ireland Senior Football Championship, which would be, I think, a welcome change for a lot of people. So it seems to have a lot of support. Central Council have given it the go-ahead to go before Congress this next month, February. Back page of the Sun. Gordon Manning has that story on the GAA as well. GAA go green. And then beneath that, Jar jibes, fans say sack the board. Yob ban vow as bottle hits Cash Dunya. That's all about the situation there at Goodison. And then we have the Sunday Independent. They lead with the rugby. Great day for Jimmy O'Brien yesterday in a Leinster jersey. He scored 4 tries as Leinster hammered Bath, scored 10 tries. It was one-way traffic at the Rec. Beneath that, Rashford's late strike leaves United smiling. Just to show you even, for example, the front page of the Observer, the news section, they go with football's shame. So it's big news over in the UK, and they have a picture of Matty Cash and Lucas Digne holding their heads after being hit by bottles throwing during that game. So that's going to be a big story, I think, over in the UK this week. And then Sunday Times, the sports section, picture of Rashford wheeling away in celebration. Hammer blow, Rashford strikes late to beat West Ham, snatch place in top 4. And on the right hand side, fans protest, bottles thrown in Everton loss. Paul Joyce writing about that there. Very happy to say Dion Fanning, associate editor at The Currency, is in studio.
Hi, Joe.
You're the first paper review guest in studio since about March 2020.
Really? Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And Tommy Martin, Virgin Media Television, is with us the good old-fashioned way, virtually. Hey, Tommy.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, I'm holding out.
Tommy's in a mask for anyone listening on the radio.
Not sure about all this. It's too quick for my liking.
I hear you. So just on that fans bottle protest, I mean, there's only so much we can say, but Paul Joyce here, Sunday Times, disillusioned Everton supporters vented their fury. He writes, Everton confirmed that a supporter has been arrested, identified on CCTV. Lucas Digne, of course, the former Everton defender, was hit, as was Matty Cash. And then chants of sack the board, and Bill Kenwright was on the streets, flanked by police officers as he was about to get into a car, talking with fans for a couple of minutes about the situation. He was asked to explain the season. He replied, horrible. And on it goes for Everton. Thinking of Man City scoring a late goal against Arsenal, getting hit by bottles and coins thrown down, and now this. Is this a more common thing, Dion, of late? Not especially?
Potentially. Like there is that sense in football, and not just in football, I suppose, that people are on a knife edge all the time about their whatever tribes they happen to belong to, and you know there is possibly a pattern there. But I think this story is also specific to Everton. I think it is. I saw the Bill Kenwright stuff, and it does. Clearly things have gone very wrong for Everton this season. Like the decision to appoint Benitez was a terrible one, doomed to end how it did end, and the fact that Lucas Dean was playing for Villa yesterday, sold by Everton because he fell out with Benitez, and you see the sack the board banners there, and whatever the Everton fans felt about Benitez, there's also a question mark about a board who sacks him, but before they do, they actually sell the player that he's fallen out with and who's been such a good player for Everton. So there's an awful lot of stuff there that isn't going to be resolved by, Duncan Ferguson is a caretaker appointment. He is making it. It's kind of an instructive in how far and only so far making all the right PR noises will go. There was a quote from him before the game where he was asked, "Do these players realise what it means to play for Everton?" And he said, "They do now." And you could argue that they've known all through the season. They haven't reflected. The modern day Everton has been sort of personified on the pitch. But there was also, I think they said on BT yesterday said that Duncan Ferguson had called all the pubs around Goodison and said the first drink is on me today. And again, that's great, that's fantastic, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't really do anything for Everton. But they're gonna stick close to the Everton way now. They're gonna Rooney is the favourite to take the job, and again, a club lurching from one extreme to another, and it isn't going to get any better anytime soon.
No. Did Duncan not care to mention to the players what playing for Everton meant over the previous number of months when he was assistant? No.
But maybe he was maybe Rafa was holding him back by his own instructions.
Just a brief mention. So Jonathan Northcroft, I don't know if people are into their match reports these days or not, but there are plenty of them around. But he makes a nice summation, I think, of events at Old Trafford yesterday, where he says Rangnick is one of the thinkers who's shaped modern football, but sometimes it pays to put the brain away and surrender to emotion, to forget innovation and go old school. Can't break a deadlock, just send on a whole lot of strikers. And that pretty much sums up what happened yesterday. He said there's nothing philosophical in putting first one and then two and then three additional goal scorers on the pitch when looking for a breakthrough. So he says that it was quite a gamble, as in Bruno Fernandes was their sole midfielder, quite a gamble, and Rangnick's bet came in, and how. So I don't know, Tommy, maybe that's the moment where Rangnick has started to win Manchester United fans over. We'll have to see.
I don't know, I was watching the highlights of this last night, and it's one of those situations where, West Ham were obviously emboldened enough to be pushing for a win, and Jared Bowen loses the ball high up on the right wing, and the fullback Fredericks is pushed on, and look, to give Rangnick credit, he did put on. I mean, you look at who he put on: Rashford, Cavani, and Martial. I mean, that's what United have. They do have that firepower, but that's not any different to what was happening under Solskjaer. It was can we win games with the sheer weight of attacking talent that we have, that they've amassed over the last few years of lavish spending, and you could be looking at a situation where that ball goes into the box. On West Ham point of view, they get a win, and it's more gloom for Man United. On the other hand, you're talking about this as a potential turnaround for Rangnick, or potential, maybe things are lifting for United now under Rangnick. It's not really, in the bigger picture, like when Rangnick came in, this was the hardest game he had in terms of league football between his appointment and Man City on the 5th of March. So this was the one where, you might say they'd have a bit of a test. Everything else has been, should have been, theoretically manageable for a squad like United's. So all it really says is that, maybe he's knocked them into a little bit of shape and a bit of order. I don't think there's any great evidence of his his style of play that we expected to see yet. Certainly the noise is coming from some pieces during the week. Doesn't sound like the players are particularly bothered, nor should they be for a guy who's only an interim manager. I mean, the whole thing is it's just so typical United. Like, United is like it's like a Netflix drama. It's like a Ted Lasso situation. It's just Rangnick's the new character in here for this season, for this series. It'll be somebody else next season. And all the while, like, they're good enough. I mean, when you look at what they're trying to do, they're good enough to finish top 4. If he knocks them into a bit of shape, they will do that. But you look at what the real top teams are able to do in terms of that pressing football. It's just so much more sophisticated and way beyond anything. You kind of wonder if United, what's the point in even trying to do it, like Liverpool and City do it. So I mean, great moment for United fans, another last minute winner, but same old really.
I agree with Tommy. I think we talked about Everton. I think United's willingness to embrace the next fad and then realise that maybe they got it wrong again is kind of extraordinary. Whilst at the same time, during the period since Ferguson has left, managing to miss out on all, like, this is an era of great coaches.
They've managed to dodge them all.
And that isn't, like, ultimately at some point you have to kind of go, okay, this isn't just bad luck. Like, what is it about? And they didn't want to appoint Conte. Now, he's not in the Guardiola Klopp bracket, but he's not far off it. And again, they gave themselves reasons and justifications for not going for Conte. The only one they went for was Mourinho, who was over the hill at that point. And Rangnick, he came in, and like, the interim thing, as Tommy said, like, the way he wants to work, it's very hard to kind of get people to buy into it if they know he's going in 3 months. But at the same time, he's there as the consultant to appoint the next manager after what is, unless something extraordinary happens, is probably going to be a pretty mediocre kind of run as manager. He's now going to be the guy detailed with finding the next manager. Maybe they'll get it right then, or maybe again there is something in how Manchester United operates, and we saw it in the stuff Ed Woodward came out with, our sources close to Ed Woodward came out with in the weeks his departure was announced, that maybe there is something in the structure of the club as it is now that is stopping them. And they seem to be going right back to Ferguson, and I thought it was interesting in those Ed Woodward stories that he was stunned and almost reconsidered taking the job on his very first time, when Alex Ferguson told him he was retiring. A 71-year-old man announced that he was retiring, and this took Ed Woodward by surprise. Like, this isn't really, you compare them, for all their faults, you compare them to how Manchester City have developed and how they have used their money smartly, and it's night and day.
Yeah, it's been surgical. So page 21 of the Sunday Times, we have an Irishman interviewing an Irishman. One of them is David Walsh, the chief sports writer for the Sunday Times, an English paper, and we have Owen Morgan, who's the captain of the England T20 side. At the moment, they're trying to build up to the World Cup, which is in 9 months' time, and he's in Barbados, and they have a 5-match T20 series against the West Indies. And this is kind of just an interesting conversation, and it's for an English audience and for an Irish audience. So he's 36 years old now. Morgan, no intention of retiring, is the big hook for the interview in many ways, and he's talking to Walsh via Zoom. He reminds the audience generally, I suppose the English in particular, Morgan, a teenager, he left his home in North County Dublin having no ambition other than to become a test match cricketer. And that didn't quite work out in the way he would have hoped, but when it comes to the shorter formats of the game, it really has worked out. And Walsh mentions how he's built a fine career in limited overs cricket. He's recognised as much for his leadership as his batting. He looks younger than his age on Zoom, says David Walsh, retains the enthusiasm that compelled him to give up the good life in Ireland for what he imagined might be a better one in London. And then he gets into the interesting part. When Owen Morgan speaks of we, he now means England. and he says that he feels more English than Irish, in quotes, more English than Irish. This needs explanation. So Owen Morgan says, England's given me a life full of opportunity, family I absolutely love, and I'll spend the rest of my life here. It's been an amazing journey. As a family, we went back to Ireland for Christmas to see my parents. I love being there as well. I'm Irish and I'm English. I moved here with a dream, and I'm living that dream at the moment. So David Walsh brings up the upcoming Six Nations, for instance, because Morgan was a decent fly half at Catholic University School in Dublin before cricket became his life. Saracens are his club and his team, but who are his country? So Walsh says, surely at Twickenham on March 12th, you'll be cheering for Ireland. Morgan says, for that game, I feel I have a foot in both camps and it's a win-win situation for me. David Walsh says, no, this is one game where a Dubliner can't sit on the fence. And Owen Morgan says, I'll be firmly on the fence. I've seen both sides of the fence and I like both sides, and there's nothing wrong with that. Interesting, Dion.
Very interesting, Joe. I would say that for an awful lot of Irish people who live in England, they would go a long way down the road with what Owen Morgan is saying. The last maybe 5 or 10%, I'm not sure how much Owen Morgan really, look, he says it, you have to take it on face value, but the fact that there are a few booby traps there in terms of being an England captain and coming out and saying you won't be supporting England, because if you remember, he got a hard time for not singing. I think Piers Morgan a few years ago gave him a hard time for not singing God Save the Queen as England captain.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, so there is that awareness to, he's aware of that bigger picture, the hostage of fortune he gives if he says something. But I think when I say that a lot of Irish people, the Irish people who made their lives in England, who are extremely happy there, who have, maybe, have English family, have all that kind of thing, who have kids who support England. I consider, I lived there for a long time. I have, my son was born there. I have all those factors I would consider, like a lot of similarities. We've come back here now. But so I think what he says about England is very true for an awful lot of Irish people. But the bit that people will be interested in is the bit that I wonder about, because I think there's he's playing a political game to a degree there. I remember before, it must have been during the World Cup, and Morgan was asked, maybe England had a before the Football World Cup, and Morgan was asked something about World Cup memories in a England cricket press conference. I think that's what I'm remembering it right. But anyway, clearly he was asked the question, what are your World Cup memories? And clearly his World Cup memories were, Giant Stadium or whatever. And he gave a very kind of vague answer again, because there is a huge, being England captain is a he's a one-day captain. It's not quite the same as being the captain of the England Test match team. But Morgan is a phenomenal leader. He probably should have been captain of the Test match team. And it is a role that England views as a kind of, as a huge, like it's a deeply symbolic role, and it's something that has great meaning in the country. So I think he's clearly trying to reflect that in his answers. And the other thing to remember is on the other side of it, he has given great answers. He has spoken brilliantly about the England cricket team, because it is actually a team, a multicultural team, the team that he leads, and he has given wonderful answers, and very in a country led by the clowns that it's led by, he's been one of these people in sport who's actually spoke in a way that actually would make you remind you of the tolerant, multicultural country that England is as well.
Yes. I don't doubt he's been very sincere here, Tommy. At the same time, whatever his, deepest, darkest feelings, he probably, as Dion says, understands he can't come out and say, well, I really hope Ireland destroy England at Twickenham.
Yeah, I think this is where, and like it's something we are very well versed in this country, from the flip side of the situation, from the Jack Charlton days in particular, and before, and the granny rule and all that, is where the sort of intangible or heartfelt feelings about nationality in your country and patriotism and all those sort of potentially kind of dubious things, as well as things that a lot of people are very positive about, meet with the hard realities of the life of a professional sports person, like the simple career path that a professional sports person wants to follow and looks to build their career on. I mean, his career path is of an elite cricketer in Ireland, and to excel and to fulfill himself, he had to make that sort of, he had to make that leap. Now, I don't know, Dion might know this. Is his mother English?
Yeah, she is, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, it's that there's that there. But other players have done it as well from an Irish cricket point of view. But, he was good enough, as Dion says, to be not just a journeyman over there and have a taste of it, but to get to the position where he did and captain England to win the Cricket World Cup. I mean, and a huge public position, and he has, as you guys are saying, to manage that in his public pronouncements. But where that hard reality, and it was the same as Ray Houghton and Andy Townsend and Tony Cascarino coming over here, meets with the sort of cloudy, wishy-washy kind of, or sometimes toxic, sometimes very kind of powerful force of nationality, is a very kind of delicate and personal place for sports people to be. And like that paragraph that you read there, England has given, he says he feels more English than Irish. England has given me a life full of opportunity, a family that I absolutely love. I'll spend the rest of my life here. It's been an amazing journey, etc., etc. You could read that in the voice of a rugby player coming to Ireland from South Africa or New Zealand and building their life in the same way, and it would make sense. Like we know that sort of paradigm, if you like. So seeing it from a Ireland to England point of view is so unusual. But it's just that sort of point where professional sport and that whole area of identity kind of meet.
Yeah. But that's interesting. Because we would embrace it if it was, as Tommy says, a South African or a New Zealand, and they were they weren't just saying we're here for the duration of our contract.
We'd swoon. Why wouldn't he love us?
Yeah, we'd be delighted that it meant they'd stay here. Oh, you love us. You really love
genuine.
us. Yeah, it was a genuine thing. But we are also so hypersensitive about anything in the other direction, especially with England.
Yes. Well, a natural segue then is to Simon Cox on page 7 of the Sunday Times, talking here with Paul Rowan, who's he's just got the job as Billericay Town manager in the non-league in Essex, and he sat down for a coffee with Paul Rowan. He says, I've nothing but fond memories of my experience with the national team. Gave me opportunities which I never expected, so I can't say thank you enough for that reason. I loved it. And he does talk about the being English and playing for Ireland aspect. He says, to be accepted, you have to be seen to be given more. That was the way I felt. I didn't want anybody to ever label me, you weren't born here, so you don't deserve it. And he remembered at the time Robbie Keane saying things like, if you don't want to play for Ireland, don't declare for us, or Stephen Hunt saying, anyone who's 100% Irish, God bless, would like to be here. So he was aware of that aspect as well. The other thing which jumps out is, I suppose a few things. Ultimately, his spat with John Delaney, which he feels curtailed his Irish career. This was at the Euros in 2012. This was after the 3 games in Ireland were knocked out, and there was a knees up afterwards in Poznan. And he went to the bar where he says John Delaney was there with Robert Finnegan of 3 Mobile, and they were talking. I offered them a drink. Delaney was like, no, we're good, thanks. Then he slapped me in a jokey kind of a way across the face. I said, don't do that. Then he said, then he did it again. And I said, no, seriously, John, don't do that. And then he did it again. I said, if you do that again, I'm going to lay you out in front of everybody. Then Robert Finnegan said, enough of that. It was awkward for him. I took my drink, went up to my room in case it got any worse. I didn't want to make a big thing of it either. If he'd come up and said, sorry, I had a bit too much to drink and I was out of order, let's just put it to one side, I would have said, John, I've forgotten about it. But he didn't, and it sort of carried on. On the way home, he said goodbye to everybody on the plane and shook their hand. He didn't shake my hand. Same thing on the next away trip. I thought, fine, no problem. And then he was cut from the squad. Noel King, you might remember, took over briefly from Trapattoni. I got a text from Noel to say, you're not in the squad. I'll give you a call to explain. I said, no problem. Give me a call when you're free. I didn't get the call. He was briefly in with Martin O'Neill and Roy Keane, and they cut him adrift eventually as well. He doesn't seem, I would say, particularly bitter about the situation, though, Dion. I think it's just the way Simon Cox tells those stories and a few others, almost getting into a fight with Stephen Hunt on a golf course because he felt they had hit balls on top of the group ahead when they hadn't moved on far enough, and that becomes a thing. Get the impression Simon Cox sees this as the rough and tumble of football life. Like, why wouldn't there be scraps at every turn?
Yeah, I guess like from the point of view of the Euros in 2012, it's just another insight into the kind of how it was going off the field, like the sort of drunken antics of the former chief executive, and like it's very hard to say that Simon, he isn't Wes Hoolahan, he isn't Andy Reid. Like this idea that Ireland lost out on a generational talent because of an argument in a hotel bar.
I was surprised he had 30 caps even.
Yeah,
he did pretty well when he played, in fairness to him, but I didn't realise he got to 30.
He did, yeah, he did fine. It is an interesting thing that idea, and again, everyone brings their own stuff to it. But the idea he said, that he came into it where he did feel there was this idea that you had to try harder if you were an English-born player, that you had to kind of demonstrate that you wanted to be there, and it does, go back to. I suppose maybe in a squad that's a little less established and is struggling a bit, that those things are harder to ascertain, or else maybe we think about them more because, when you think back to players coming in the past, that was a sort of a given, that whether, like Andy Townsend or somebody came into the Ireland squad and just picked, just did what everybody else was doing and just matched it. So like, when you read that, you think about the idea that, as an Irish-born player, you might think you don't have to try as hard as an English-born player. It's kind of, it would be curious, but it's, it is interesting into those times, and it is as Paul Rowan says, at the end, like it was a rather surreal time in Irish football, and he said, like, it is when you look back on it, and we were all there for it, and yet he says he loved talking to Marco Tardelli, and you get great experiences out of, it would be great experience listening to Marco Tardelli, a World Cup winner, speak about things. And then every time Trapp would talk, you would pick up the odd word, he says. And like you think about the hours and hours and hours we all spent sitting in front of, and I, and kind of loved them in for the most part, because there was some, like Trapattoni did manage to transmit a wonderful, like it's a strange energy and a great energy. And sometimes, like I often felt his press conferences, it wouldn't be hard, but his press conferences were more entertaining than anything that the Ireland team served up. Yet they were more entertaining without you actually ever understanding anything that he was saying. It was, delivered through physical actions, through gestures. But we all sat there willingly looking at transcripts of these things, looking at, trying to get sense out of what he'd said. And it was an extraordinary time in that sense as well. And the players were equally as kind of lost a lot of the time, is again, does like point to this kind of surreal time in Irish football. Yeah. And with John Delaney in the bar in Soapnot.
It does say...
Well, that bit's totally out of character. I mean, I really question that now.
It does mention that maybe he rubbed people up the wrong way a touch, Simon Cox, and that when he first got into the squad, he jumped right into the training group with all the, the Robbie Keanes and Richard Dunn group and sort of, let me at it. And it was generally their spot, Shay Given, Damien Duff. I wasn't really about taking my time to settle in. I was more like, I want to go and play with you guys, you're the cool kids. And, he says, looking back, he realises he may have wound people up the wrong way. And maybe it might have been perceived as a certain cockiness. Because the byline in the piece is why he always felt an outsider with Ireland. So, but part of that seems to be the English thing. The other thing which jumps out is, so Noel King says, you're not in the squad, I'll give you a call. Doesn't call him. Martin O'Neill brings his career to an end. Doesn't call him. Like, the standard of man management sometimes, Tommy, in this world is just hard to get your head around.
School of hard knocks, isn't it? Deal with it. You know, no, softly.
No.
Gently. I thought it was interesting, that bit about that, you know, you think of dynamics of squads, and, you know, we talked about the interesting about the Charlton years is Jack's main captains in that time were Mick McCarthy and Andy Townsend. So they were sort of, you know, obviously English born players, so there was almost a sense that, like, that sort of part of the squad was central to that sort of part of the whole thing was central to the identity of the squad. Whereas in Simon Cox's time, you know, it was Robbie Keane, it was you know, Shea Given, it was Duffer, it was Richard Dunn. They were all Irish born players, and you wonder, was it harder for an English born player to come in, and a guy who didn't have a big profile and maybe wanted to, you know, put himself in there and make the most of it? And you kind of wonder, I mean, Stephen Hunt might have been the one who was kind of openly sort of, you know, the impression from this piece is that he was pretty hostile towards him. But was there a little bit of a sense that, yeah, you know, there's a kind of the Irish born players are kind of the main guys here, and you're just making up the numbers.
Or maybe if he was a right back, Hunty would have greeted him with open arms, you know?
Yeah, well, maybe it's as simple as that.
That is interesting though as well, because I think Jack did think, you know, that there was a greater buy-in likely from guys who that were slightly detached from the kind of, you know, you look at the people he fell out with, like they were David O'Leary, Frank Stapleton, Liam Brady, Ronnie Whelan to a degree. Ronnie Whelan was captain going into the Italian 90 and didn't get his place, and they were the blue bloods of Irish football. Like they were they were aristocrats. They were, like, came from the heart of Irish football in Dublin. And Jack's appeal was Jack took Irish football outside that constituency, and he made an appeal to the country that sometimes Dublin football had felt sort of isolated from. And I think, you know, the fact that he then had captains, as Tommy said, that were from outside that world made their devotion to him and his way greater than somebody like Ronnie Whelan possibly, or David O'Leary wasn't going to be captain, but these people who had a kind of history in Ireland beforehand.
They were also footballers who liked to pass the ball, which is the chief issue.
Interestingly, one of the first things that Charlton did before Jack's time, when everybody came over, when the squads came over from England, the Irish, the homegrown players would go off to see their families, you know, and might spend the night in, you know, with their families, or maybe go and meet them, and the sort of diaspora players, the second generation players, would be in the hotel almost as a different sort of cohort. And he ended that, and he said everybody stays together, everybody socialises together, and there won't be that division anymore. So
I think
obviously part of that as well.
Just before we just on this opposite page on that, it's just worth just noting as well the Queeving Kelleher progress at Liverpool. Like, when we're talking about Irish-born players, and, you know, it has been such a it's not a time for Irish-born players at big clubs in England, but just Klopp confirming that he will start in the Carabao Cup final, and Paul Rowan has a piece on basically Kelleher's decision to stay at Liverpool rather than go out at loan, which has been beneficial for him now because they've reached this final and he'll play at Wembley, but it's been hugely beneficial for Liverpool because he's clearly emerging as an outstanding goalkeeper, and the idea that you can have a goalkeeper like that to call on, especially in a time of COVID and things like that, where you might be, you know, they lost Alisson to COVID recently, and, you know, that there are opportunities for a keeper, but it's also been Liverpool now having a keeper of Kelleher's standing. Is very good for them, but the fact that he's emerging, and I guess this piece makes the same point that everyone feels about the fact that we now have two. There's not much more we can say about that, but the fact that we seem to be developing two world-class goalkeepers seems to be somehow some kind of cruelty.
Pages 12 and 13 of the Sunday Independent. It's a really good piece. This is Tommy Conlon, who's out in that neck of the woods, out in Connacht, obviously. And so the Pleasure Dome, welcome to the Pleasure Dome is the headline, has caught everybody's eye in the world of GAA over the last couple of weeks. And so Tommy was given the full tour by John Prenty of the Connacht County Board, and it's a great piece, really enjoyable. And he talks about, the various interesting innovations out in that part of the world. Talks about Knock, where there were visionaries who apparently not high on anything saw the Blessed Virgin Mary and various saints and angels materialise on the gable wall of the parish church in 1879. Then he mentions Monsignor James Horan bringing Knock Airport to life in 85, and now we have the Pleasure Dome. So he gets the guided tour, and the place is an absolute success thus far. It is booked out forever. So John Prenty later on in the piece says, a meeting demand has become a job in itself. It's booked out for the next 3 or 4 months solid. Today the Galway hurlers were looking for it for next week, not available. Weekends are hectic too. Clubs booking fitness tests, and there's games happening and schools games. And this just seems like the kind of innovation and great thinking, and then an ability to carry something out which is probably all too rare too often. So the point here is that the Connacht Council is responsible for running 1,500 games a year. Vast majority of them are school fixtures. Now, they don't have their own pitches, so the issue down the years is that they had to get onto clubs and look for pitches. Cancellations were common. Normally on a Tuesday or Wednesday, Thursday, we'd send out the notifications, and then on Monday, the girls in the office spend their time looking for new pitches, trying to get games played. So it was a constant issue, and that was what led them to buy the 63 acres on this site. It was farmland in Becken. They bought it initially. They built 6 state-of-the-art pitches, one of them AstroTurf, 3 of them with floodlighting, a car park for 400 cars, 20 buses installed, a new building there as well with video analysis suites and so on. This was opened in 2012, cost 10 million. This is like a centre of excellence for Connacht GAA. And Tommy says it was one of those projects which very few people saw the need for beforehand, and everyone thought was a great idea afterwards, the first of its kind in any of the provinces. And they got 7 million of the money there came from Croke Park being opened up when the GAA made 36 million from the Irish soccer and rugby games between 07 and 10. So that's where that money went, is kind of a cool thing to know. But then they used to sometimes sit around and say, like, Jays, wouldn't it be great to have an indoor pitch of some kind, given the weather as well? So madly, Enda Kenny pops by one day in 2016 when he's teaching to have a look at this centre of excellence. And Enda Kenny says to them, did you ever think about building an air dome? We hadn't, he said, at that stage, thought about an air dome. So he said there was an air dome in Castlebar for tennis. As soon as Kenny was gone, the lads hightailed it to Castlebar for a look. And they get things moving. They go to Finland. They look at an air dome there. It's much cheaper than building steel and concrete structure. They needed 3 million. So they had 700,000 left over from the Centre of Excellence. So they needed another 2.5 million. Long story short, they go through the various ways to get money from government, and they end up getting over 2 million from government. The thing is built, and it's just a total success. And brilliantly, they're not charging an arm and a leg for this thing. This isn't about making profit. So for instance, if we wanted, the 3 of us, to go and rent the Air Dome for an hour and a half match, €150. He says, very reasonable. We're not here to make money out of GAA clubs. It's to improve their lot and to keep the place running. They only need 50 grand a year to keep it running. NUIG are sponsoring it. So I just read this, Dion, and I thought, bloody hell, fair play to all concerned, because that just seems like a total success story across the board.
It's an amazing story, and it also has the little bit we always like. You know, they even had a visitor from Barcelona FC, the great club's facilities manager. And there's nothing we like more in a story like this, to know that, you know,
rubber stamp it.
He
says, without a hint of irony, this could be the new La Manga. Well,
it's an incredible facility. It really is, and it's testament to the drive and just imagination and innovation and persistence of John Prenty.
Prenty's Tenty.
Prenty's Tenty, yeah, that's the other aspect. We need 2 things. We need a nickname, and we need, you know, some external validation, and it's all here. And it is. It's like, I would ask Joe, when you say we can rent it for €150 for an hour and a half, for what purpose?
Well, I would think Gaelic Games. Strictly. Yeah. I wouldn't think you'd be bringing an oval ball in there.
No.
But I don't know. Although if the Galway hurlers can't get it, then I don't think we should be allowed to go in with a soccer ball.
No, but it is an interesting thing when you say, like, it is. And again, this comes back to you talk about the vision, you talk about the innovation, you talk about the drive and the desire, and then you feel, right, well, the people and the groups that have driven this are entitled then to say this is for our sports. But then you read through the story and you see, the Michael Ring announced that 2.1 million would go to the project. As you mentioned, the GAA made money available from the IRFU and the FAI renting Croke Park to it. And you think, would this facility be even greater if it was available to all sports? And everybody was using it. And maybe they are. And I guess the first thing they would say is, well, they're full with everybody. But you were saying that they can, how quickly can they turn around for a concert?
I think in 72 hours they can either have 10,000 seats or ready for 20,000 standing.
And how quickly could they turn it around for a soccer match?
5 years. I don't know. I mean, maybe it is open to sports beyond GAL. It doesn't actually specify here.
No, but I don't know. And I guess, but it does come there's no. This isn't saying you open this up, but it is an interesting way, because the GAA person's response will be, understandably, we've done this.
Yeah.
We've come up with the vision. But there's all through the story there is. Public funding involved, and everyone's getting public funding. And Paul Rowan has a story about the in the Sunday Times about the COVID funding that was made available to the FAI. So everyone is getting that money.
Yeah, I would think it's not open, because I think strictly the rule is that Rule 42 only applied to Croke Park, and beyond the Croke Park facilities, it's only in exceptional circumstances, a la the Liam Miller testimony.
Yeah,
we had a story recently about the soccer.
There was a story of an underage soccer team where some jobs worth in the area decided to report the local soccer team using the facility to Croke Park, and Croke Park had to stay.
Well, I think it turned out to be the county board rather than the Croke board. Whatever it was, there was a rule there somewhere that stopped them.
So that's the GAA rule, and that's a bigger conversation. So at the moment, I mean, it's the Connacht Centre of Excellence for GAA. So I'd say it's fairly much GAA. The county councils get a bad rap, I would think, or even the provincial councils rather, Tommy. I mean, when you say to anyone, what does a provincial council do? I think we would say they just try and stop the Inter-County Football Championship changing. That's their job.
Don't mess with the provincial championships. Yeah, I just thought, well, I mean, I think, look, you've covered it there. It's a great piece to sort of explain the genesis of this idea, including, quotes from Frankie Goes to Hollywood and Samuel Taylor Coleridge in Xanadu to Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree, and Tommy Conlon calls John Kubla Prenti. So he's definitely getting a good write up this morning.
Shout out to Enda Kenny.
Yeah, and Enda as well.
Throwaway remark
from in Barcelona, as you say as well. But the headline as well. Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. John Prenti didn't set out to build a symbol, but in the beacon of is it Beacon?
I went with Beacon.
Connacht have a modern facility to be proud of. Like, it is hugely symbolic. When I flicked on the TV one day and there was a match between Galway and Roscommon from this place on TG Car one day, I mean, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was just something so just absolutely dazzling about it. And reading about the in July 23rd, 2020, when they blew up the dome, they inflated it, 3 wind blowers powered by electric generators inflated the balloon. Crowds of onlookers gathered to watch the operation. It reminded me of, accounts of the Montgolfier brothers and the first hot air balloon flight in Victorian times, or the birth of the railways, all these Victorian, Brunel and all these people, and the spirit of kind of ambition and nothing. The sky is the limit, and it's got that real kind of scale of ambition. And John Prenti, as Tommy Collins says, he's a pragmatist, and Jays wouldn't it be great to have an indoor pitch? It's all very nuts and bolts, but it is hugely symbolic. And for Connacht as well, and I don't just mean Connacht GAA, the beacon of Beacon, so to speak, it can be an engine for the local economy, and beyond that, he argues, a statement of ambition for the whole province. People can look at it and say, geez, Connacht is vibrant, it's alive, it's a place where people can go and prosper. It is that sense of, wow, this is something. Now, the other side of that is, and this is taps into what Dion is saying. Like, part of my reaction to seeing this place and the news reports about it and the coverage and the live matches is there's a little bit of like, oh, we don't deserve nice things. You know, that this, we think, isn't this amazing that this is in Ireland? Whereas you go to other countries, you know, famously Iceland, they took the money from qualifying for the Euros and built, you know, half a dozen of these things. And other countries with abysmal climates like ours, you know, the state invests in facilities, multi-sport facilities, whereas of this nature to help, you know, sports across the board. Whereas, as we know, the Irish state has traditionally outsourced lots of things to people that to other, you know, outside agencies, you know, outsource schooling and healthcare to the churches and, you know, et cetera, and outsource sport largely to the GAA and anybody else who could muster muster up the wherewithal to organise sport. That's obviously changed in recent decades with, you know, funding of facilities and high performance unit through Sport Ireland, etc. But like, it does come down to, I mean, we should have places like this. It's not that expensive, you know.
3 million, yeah.
We should have places like this available for multi-sport use around the country, and we do deserve it. It is amazing, but you know, like it shouldn't be as sort of jarring to see it as it was this January.
Because you're worth it, says Tommy Martin. I agree entirely.
Yeah.
We'll take a short break. Tommy Martin and Dion Fanning staying with us. Now, you're welcome back. Sunday Paper Review. We have Dion Fanning, Associate Editor at The Currency, with us. We have Tommy Martin of Virgin Media Television. I suppose this is where we sort of move into what we can call broadly the geopolitical section of the discussion. Some very interesting pieces in that sphere. So, for instance, we're going to get the two faces of China here from very different places. Page 11 of the Sunday Times main section. Tommy spotted this, and this is with the Winter Olympics upon us. The subheadline is, "Determined to avoid embarrassment at the Winter Olympics, Beijing is crushing dissent with a system of, quote, black jails into which tens of thousands have vanished." So in the 6 months up to the end of 2020, 15,000 people were held in these secret jails, is one of the eye-catching lines here. And it starts off with somebody who's been there. Interrogators hung him from the ceiling and beat him. He was talking about it afterwards. Xi is his name. I haven't mispronounced that, but he said that he had to ultimately confess to having been brainwashed overseas, and he had a dreadful time in this jail network. His immediate offence was to protest about the treatment of a teacher who had been thrown into a psychiatric hospital last month after she criticised the authorities, and that was why he was in turn, when he spoke out about this situation, that was why he went into one of these jails. And the piece says the timing of these arrests is interesting. It's a determination to erase awkward distractions from the countdown to next month's Winter Olympics, and the Chinese Communist Party want to showcase the glory of the People's Republic. And the piece goes on to talk about the situation in these jails, the torture, the sleep deprivation, food deprivation, extended time in shackles, cuffs, beatings, forced medication, denial of medical treatment, sexual abuse, stress positions for extended periods, such as being hung by the wrists, and the threat of physical harm to them and their loved ones. There's a human rights lawyer quoted later on, Zhi Tengbiao. Disappearances, says this human rights lawyer, are a necessity for this dictatorship. Disappearances are a necessity for this dictatorship. And he said as well, the hardest part during the 70 days was the uncertainty, not the torture. You never know how long you'll be detained or how long you'll live in the dark, knowing that your family also has no idea of your whereabouts. So, Tommy, this jumped out to you, I think, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, you know, why it appears in a review of the sports sections of the paper is because obviously this clampdown, or the intensification of this clampdown, is timed to correspond to the Winter Olympics, which start on February the 4th. A hugely controversial Winter Olympics, which have been the subject of pretty feeble diplomatic boycotts from the US, the UK, a number of other states, but really very minimal sort of a kickback to what China has done. There's a brief mention of Xinjiang and the Uyghur repression, which has been ongoing and very publicly discussed over the last few years. The Peng Shuai, the Chinese tennis player, her case is obviously part of this, and this piece puts her case into the context of the greater suppression of dissent, which is being done by these, to give them their correct name, as RSDL units, residential surveillance at a designated location, which are basically, you get stuck in there for any amount of time, you get interrogated, you describe the methods that are used. Eventually generally it's human rights lawyers or people who've spoken up about different situations or mistreatment of people. Someone like Peng Shui, obviously, and more it's public figures it's happening to. There's an actress who appeared in some of the Marvel franchise movies, Fan Bingbing. She was disappeared in 2018, emerged several months later after agreeing to pay a fine of $127 million. And there's a very popular influencer as well. And part of that is because, according to this piece, it says the clampdown on celebrities reflects the party's suspicion of anyone who amasses a following that could make them a source of power and influence. So it's not just speaking up against the regime, is that by simply having an influence, you are considered a threat to the state. Like, this is, China saw what Gorbachev did in the Soviet Union, 30, 40 years ago, and said, we ain't doing that. Yeah. And it's been an intensification of tightening of clamping down on freedom of expression and political dissidence, to the point where, the Peng Shuai case is just, we know that, some people don't know the sequence of events. Very successful Chinese number one tennis player put out on her social media page that she'd be coerced into sex with a leading figure in the regime. The post was taken down not before it being shared worldwide. She was disappeared for a length of time and then paraded publicly, including that notorious and that awful Zoom call with the president of the IOC, Thomas Bach, which was, which the human rights organizations have dismissed as a charade, to sort of make this, to whitewash this situation. Safeguard Defenders are the human rights organization who've picked up on these RSDL units. They say China disappeared Peng Shui because she had the courage to speak out against sexual abuses by a senior party official. This is Michael Castor of that organization. Beijing has disappeared tens of thousands of its citizens for no less arbitrary reasons to silence and intimidate. We must not allow China to use the spotlight as Olympics host to manipulate the narrative and whitewash its record. And that's where it comes to what we're talking about here. We're going to see next month. I think New York Times have a big piece about this as well, where it basically described this as China's equivalent of what the 1936 Olympics were for the Nazi regime in Germany. It's going to be a big, we're amazing for Xi Jinping and his regime, and the whole machine of the Olympic movement and the global sporting family are because of China's global geopolitical power. Despite all these stories, and despite the Peng Shuai case and all these tens of thousands of people who've been mistreated, and despite the Xinjiang, the Uyghurs are just going to trot up and go along with it, and it seems, just play their part in the whole thing.
Yeah. I feel so despondent about the whole thing, I have to say. Last month I tweeted out an article on what's happening to the Uyghurs. If you want to check it out, it's about a month ago. I don't tweet that often, so you'll find it pretty quickly, at Malloy Joe, and it's on The Guardian. So I was surprised this didn't generate more conversation, really, because basically there was a UK-based Uyghur tribunal. So basically a bunch of lawyers, academics, business people got together to put on a tribunal. It had no government backing, but just to try and highlight what's happening to the Uyghur Muslims over in China. And if you're of a sensitive disposition, I'd say just fast forward for the next minute to a minute and a half on your podcast if you're listening that way. If you're on the radio, kids in the car, I'd step away for a moment. But in effect here, they are taking apart. It amounts to genocide of a certain variety. The report says there's evidence that the detainees have been confined in containers up to their neck in cold water, shackled by heavy metal chains, immobilised for months on end. Some of the detained have been subjected to extreme sexual violence, including gang rapes, penetration with electric shock rods and iron bars, women raped by men paying to be allowed into the detention centre for the purpose of raping the women. They pay in to do that. The tribunal found evidence of enforced abortions, the removal of wombs against women's will, the killing of babies immediately after birth, and the mass enforced sterilisation through the insertion of IUD devices that were only removable by surgical means. And they say across the 29 counties, the birth rate has fallen by 58.5% in comparison with the previous 4 years. And hundreds of thousands of Uyghur children have been taken from their families, placed in boarding schools. Burial grounds have been bulldozed or built over, mosques destroyed, and religious practice banned, and on it goes. I mean, it's utterly horrific. I mean, the world kept spinning, and you kind of think, well, I mean, if that doesn't shock us all into some kind of action, what do you do? And that's what Tommy's piece is tying in with. And so to clap the Winter Olympics is kind of an awful prospect, isn't it?
It is, but it speaks to where the power is in the world today as well, because yes, without any real appetite for taking action among governments who all are desperately dependent on China, there is very little hope of anything being done. And there's there's an Irishman, Richard O'Halloran, who's also been in jail in China for a long time, and his family feel great despair about the sense that they seem to be knocking their heads against a brick wall in terms of getting real action on it. And again, would it be different if it was a country that we weren't all so dependent upon? It doesn't change. Obviously, it doesn't change the horror of it, and it doesn't change the sense maybe of individuals taking action. But there is a strange. It is strange that those stories, and like that's horrific stuff. And like those stories don't seem to get the same attention.
No.
As others for
that didn't make a splash. I remember reading that article on the front page of the Guardian. Yeah. It was gone within a day.
I know. It's weird, it's weird, and like these, and like this Sunday Times story about the disappeared, and that the other sinister aspect of it, that the reappearance is almost as important as well. It's you disappear and then
I was brainwashed.
Yeah, and again
say those things.
Yeah. Just on that.
It's just
sorry, Tommy. Yeah.
I completely agree. Like our own government is. I mean, China's geopolitical strength. It's pretty hard to say, and you're not going to do business with China. But it's the craven nature of sports response to all this stuff. Like, I mean, could the IOC not find a few ski slopes somewhere else in the world without that they didn't have to pander to this, appalling regime? Not only pander to it, but completely complete lackeys to the glorification of what's going on here. And I go back to the first time I became aware of it, I think might have been when Mesut Ozil tweeted about it a few years ago, and he tweeted that about asking fellow Muslims to make their voices heard about it, and Arsenal's immediate response was absolutely to wash their hands of it. These are his personal views, nothing to do with us.
Yes.
God, that's Mesut Ozil for you. What are you going to do?
And if you remember, Tommy, I think the subsequent Arsenal game was not shown then on Chinese television.
Yeah.
A little warning to Arsenal.
They don't mess around, They if you step out of line, even, and it's interesting. Even foreign status doesn't as Dion said with the Irishman who's in prison over there doesn't protect you from being mistreated over there. That's how confident they are of the strength of their position. It's just appalling. It really is.
Dion, in the Sunday Times magazine section, it's quite a long piece. John Ehrlich spends a week in Qatar. We're 10 months out from the World Cup. It's funny, I've been talking about Qatar so long, I can't believe it's actually like this year. It's like surreal that it's actually coming to pass at last. So it's a long piece. He goes through all the various aspects and controversies. What would you say is the overall takeaway from John Ehrlich after a week being shown around Qatar by, admittedly, Qatar executives and political people who do speak off the record to him a touch as well here and there in the piece. So it's not like it's a whitewash or anything.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not a whitewash piece at all. But and it details everything from the manner in which Qatar got the World Cup to the shocking, deaths of workers in the country, and the suppression of human rights there more broadly. It's like it details it all while also going through, and I suspect that this will become, the dominant thing, like the stadiums that are being built, how easy it is going to be for supporters to get around, the transport systems, all these things. And whilst we will insist on saying, let's, if we're going to, the World Cup isn't going to be boycotted at this stage. I think there's a very strong case that it should have been. It's not going to be boycotted, and people will go and cover it, which once it's happening is the right thing to be doing. But they will also say we're not going to, shy away from the other things. Let's talk about, England will visit,
workers' camp.
Workers' camp.
Yeah.
Which that's good, but ultimately, people will be distracted and will be taken in by the best countries in the world playing football in state-of-the-art stadiums. And that'll become the story, and it's very it's very, very hard, whatever the circumstances, in very different ways. Like there's always a backstory around World Cups in particular. Like South Africa will have, a lot of it has often tend to focus around personal security or security of people travelling there. Russia had, there was a lot of issues there, but the tournament itself always, they put it together in that it becomes the spectacle, which is what they're not going to mess it up. They're not going to mess up the spectacle, which is the whole purpose of getting it.
And the football certainly dominates in the memory.
Yeah.
In retrospect, it does.
And so there is no, short of a boycott, there is really nothing that can actually compensate for the fact that it's is being held there in the first place.
Yeah. I don't mean this as a criticism of the piece, Tommy. I think it was a very good piece, but it's nothing I haven't read before either.
Yeah, there's nothing new there in terms. It's more of a summary or a kind of survey of the Qatar World Cup story. I mean, you have to remember, put it in context that it was also the culmination of the most rancid sports politics story of all time as well, with the bidding process, and they essentially they bought the World Cup and that kind of feeds into some of the talk about how they expect to deal with it. There's a good bit there where it says that it's almost like they kind of bit off more than they can chew. The trouble is that Qatar's rulers do not always learn the right lessons. They've been very naive when it comes to the World Cup, argues one local observer. They should have realised sooner that their great wealth would attract greater scrutiny than previous host nations and move faster to deal with the entirely predictable issues. They've ended up overwhelmed. There's a sense that they bought the World. They lavished the corrupt political process with money to buy the World Cup and felt they could similarly, simply blow away all the problems in the same way. Now, where this is interesting is, the argument for engaging with questionable regimes is that by bringing our big sports events and our competitions and clubs in joining with them, it will shine a light on their practices and make them reform. That was you might remember when the Saudi Arabia Newcastle thing was happening. Gary Neville on Monday Night Football saying that that was why he thought we need to kind of sit down with these people, because he said I remember going to the World Cup and people said in Russia, and people said Russia had their problems, but it was just like one big happy football family for that month. Meanwhile, Putin is lining his tanks up on the borders of Ukraine and locking up his greatest political rivals. But to digress, so the interesting thing in this bit is that he goes to the workers' camp, and he's obviously been shown the World Cup camp. That is all like, well, it's quite nice. They've got, they've got proper food and it's not all cramped in. But you do hear the problem is that there's the FIFA projects around the stadiums that are all tickety boo, and then there's the fact that the contractors and the big businesses have been dragging their heels about implementing these changes. Reforming the kafala system of migrant labour. Because simply, it's the kafala system is very profitable for the construction companies and the people building. Like what's happening outside the big stadium projects, the other projects that are kind of tangentially related to hotels, they're like, and there's a suggestion there from some of the other workers that are interviewed that it's not all great. It's not all great if you look elsewhere. So there's enough of that in the piece to make you kind of think that. That whole aspect of, this World Cup will shine a light and force reforms on Qatar that, you wouldn't be quite sure that that's going to be the case. The guy, Al-Tawadi, is the member of the organising committee that's obviously John Arledge is put with to talk about the whole thing. And he makes a good point. His answers reveal a man caught between the conflicting demands of liberal Western critics on one side and local conservative forces on the other. And those forces, they will continue to pull and push even after the World Cup. So, I guess time will tell whether it does cause genuine reforms.
Yeah. I have got a wrap, unfortunately. Time against us. Just to mention, it's worth the look if you have the Mail on Sunday, page 60. Philip Quinn has spoken to Cathy Gannon, who has 440 winners to her name, both sides of the Irish Sea, a flat jockey, and it's in some respects your typical jockey story of the horrific injuries. She also talks but this is a person not to be messed with. Gannon once boxed the head off a male colleague for crossing her with an ill-judged sexist remark. I went into the weighing room and gave him 4 digs. My friends dragged me off him. That was me. I wouldn't back down. From Donna Mead, no connections in the sport, but made a great career for herself, and famously tweeted about the quality of food at Newbury and was fined for it, and all the other jockeys chipped in to pay for the fine. And it said, she says herself, it was actually good publicity in a way, got her name out there. But she starts off by saying, Cathy Gannon opens a button on her shirt to reveal a misshaped collarbone, legacy of her rough and tumble life as a flat jockey. The break never healed properly, trapped an artery underneath, blocking it to the point that she had to undergo an 8-hour operation last year. She's 40 now and just retired. They took a vein out of my leg and put it into my arm under my shoulder. It left a big scar on my leg. I'm on blood thinners now. I was Humpty Dumpty. I got a lot of falls. Broken back, my femur, my jaw, 2 collarbones. Came back from 1 collarbone after 11 days, pumped to the gills with codeine. You keep riding though, through the pain. I was told to retire 3 years before I did because of my shoulders. I was getting 3 injections a year, still had problems. I've no cartilage in either of them and need replacements, but I'm too young. So that's worth a read if you're looking for it. And I know the lads as well spotted that. We'll be talking about FBD Semple Stadium, which Mick Foley and Matt Cooper write about today. So FBD Semple Stadium will be the future. Guys, thanks so much. Dion Fanning, Associate Editor at The Currency. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks, Joe.
And Tommy Martin from Virgin Media Television. Cheers, Tommy.
Cheers, guys. Thanks.